Alright, I'm going to get just a single sheet of plywood, and when you get a single sheet of plywood, sometimes you want to make sure it's supported. So I put some 2x4s out here, and sometimes I've done this at the hardware store, just buy some 2x4s to put under it to support it. But I also put a piece of plywood up there, just a 1/4 inch piece. Not that's necessarily required, but it'll help slide things in easier, and it also shows me that that drywall is going to fit in there just fine. So now we're off to get the drywall to start patching around that door. Now a lot of times you can get a little piece of drywall if you just need a little bit. Sometimes you can get it for free, just like on Craigslist or something, but you kind of have to weigh that, how far away it is with what you got to get. And now I'm going to have leftover, so we'll see how that goes. Alright, we got it. We got one sheet, just one, and this one happened to be damaged, so they marked it down to $1, which is actually better than even getting it from Craigslist. I didn't have to drive too far out of my way. Alright, now we got it laid out on the floor, and I am going to make 2 U's, one U-shaped piece to cover the wood on this side of the door, and one to cover it on the other side of the door. Now that may seem like a lot of work just to prevent having one seam, and it may or may not even work out, but I at least want to have an L shape for this wider part to the taper, so I have less seams in there. There's less work to do once you get it in there. And then I planned on putting one U upside down with the top at the tape measure side and scooch to the right. So over here, a big U like this, and then on the other end it'd be in offset this way, and a U like that. Although I gotta watch out for that bad spot, so I'll probably put this U squished to this side so it misses that bad part, and I'll squish this one to that side as long as the length that I need fits between the end and the beginning of that bad spot. And then that bad spot would go down on the very bottom over here. Alright, let's see if we can make some cuts. Alright, because this U is kind of not square and tapers in all different directions, and I don't know how it would be oriented, it might be very difficult to cut that out in a U. Maybe an L would be more appropriate to this, I don't know. But in order to give myself some time to think about it, I'm going to cut the corner bead out of this, and you can see the corner bead right here. That is a little piece of metal that's used when that doorway is an opening. It kind of defines it, gives it a sharp, crisp edge, so you don't have just drywall hanging up there. But I want to get that out so that I don't have sort of a lump in there, and I can have a little more freedom to feather that out, and it won't have those little cracks like you get up there in the corner where that's sort of moving around a little bit up in there. But I'm going to get that taken out, and then I'm going to think about how I'm going to do this. I'll probably do, the most I'll do is an L, so up across this way. But I have to determine if this is square from the edge of the wall, or if this is square from the edge of the wall, or if neither of them is square from the edge of the wall. And I think probably neither one is. And then of course going down, it's not the same distance from the top to the bottom either. So there's a lot of challenges we're going to deal with in that very skinny piece. I'm hoping we don't end up with 3 different pieces, but I'm going to cut this corner bead out to give myself a little bit of time to think about it. Alright, there are basically 3 ways to fasten drywall to the wall. One of them being a drywall nail, like you have here. And that's what's holding this corner bead on. Now I've cut that corner bead in half, so this angle, it's kind of like a right angle that goes along the side of the wall, and I've cut it off so that I can get it out of there easier. But I've never seen this stuff hung with anything but drywall nails, because screws are, you know, a little more than you want there anyway, but nails are good for nailing that stuff up. And a lot of times you'll hang the sheeting up with screws, but generally the corner beads are going to go up with nails. And this is metal stuff. They do have some fiber-based stuff that a lot of people use now too, but this is what would go on there to finish that corner when you have an outside corner that's drywall. That way you don't have, you know, just a mud corner there. If something whacks into that, you got a little more oomph to it. And I'll get that taken out of there, and then go across the top, get that out of there. Basically there's only 2 pieces. This flat wall doesn't have anything on it, it was just straight across. I get the rest of that out of there, but I thought I'd mention the 3 methods. The gluing, which you only usually find on house trailers, nailing, and then screwing. And I will probably use screws to put this back up with. It's pretty good. There's sort of techniques for every one of them, but one of the main things you don't want to do is bust up the sheetrock or the drywall very much when you fasten it on. So you want those screws or nails to be just recessed from the surface and not, you know, pulling through the paper or anything like that. Alright, after taking that off, it's kind of, you can see it's pretty bad in the corners anyway. So tapers and stuff like that are gonna kind of be worse than the seams. So I think I'm just gonna cut them out in whatever kind of wedge shapes go in each position, and then I'll be able to, you know, position them a little bit between each other. And I don't think it's going to make much difference with the other stuff I got to deal with in this space to get that to happen. So in order to cut wedges, rather than using a T-square like I've been doing to make straight lines, I got this chalk line so we can make slanted lines, and then we'll measure at the top and the bottom, snap a line, and then cut the drywall on that line and be done with it. Alright, I got that piece in there, and now even when I got it up there, it needed some more adjustment. So I put a nail up at the top, just one nail, and then as I would find tight spots, I would take the knife and kind of shave it off wherever it was too tight to go in, and continued on down until the whole thing fell into place. And now I'll just put a couple more screws in there to hold it in place. It really doesn't need a lot of support there, and I think 2 more screws in it is going to be plenty, because it's going to be held in by a corner bead right here, and then the trim's going to go over it on this side, so it's not going to go anywhere really. But I'll just put a couple in there just to make it easier to tape up that corner joint. And one of the things I'll talk about when I start taping it is this taper on that edge. So the factory edge has a taper towards the edge of it that allows you to put some mud in along there. It gives you some space. So if you looked at a relief of it, it would meet up and then have a little bit of space out towards the wall where you can put some mud in there and get it settled in. But we'll go over that a little more in the next video. Alright, there it is, recessed just a little. It's hard to see it in that shot. But now across the top, since this piece tapers, I think what I'm going to do is just make a straight piece and then transition it from under that piece of drywall to over it on this end. So I cut out this section up here to allow that piece to fall into that hole, and then somewhere in this section right here it'll make that transition from under to over, and hopefully that will kind of go in there pretty smooth. But rather than kind of try to make a tapered piece, I'm just going to make a straight piece and then fit it in when it gets up there. Alright, now I just made a score. I took the T-square and I got this piece I've had left over. It's just a little piece, but I made a score right there at 3.5 inches, which should help me get it in there. And I don't really care how the length of it, it's just longer than that. But I wanted to show you the process of snapping it. So you take your hand and get it behind there so that you're behind that piece about where the cut is, and that's where you want to start bending it over. You can hear it starting to give a little bit, and then it just folds up. So that's the easiest way to get drywall cut, is to just score it real good, bend it, and then it'll break along that score. And then what we want to do is come along the back side and get our tool into that corner and just cut it out. Alright, and now I have that piece off, and I'll just go about putting it up into that hole and seeing how it fits. Now down there we can say it's still a little too big to fit into that slot, and on this end it should go in there pretty good, and it's hanging over. So I'll just make a mark along there, cut that out, and it looks like I can probably take that whole piece out of there and just let this piece fall in, and then just taper it off down at that end as it gets smaller, and then just fasten it up. Alright, end up with kind of a lot more pieces than I expected, but I think with all this mess here, it's going to be quite a piece of work getting that all together anyway. So I just put a joint there. I had two shorter pieces this way, one across the top and then one down the side. Same with the inside, although it's pretty dark in there. You won't probably see nothing. Yep, nothing. But it's the same deal in there. Got a bunch of leftover drywall. You may use that in the garage or whatever. But the next step is to start mudding that. And of course there are choices there as well with different kinds of mud and different kinds of tape, but I'll get into that next time. These are the two types of drywall compound. That one, the topping joint compound, and the set type. So this type sets up after, this one says 45 minutes, but it comes as a powder, and you mix that powder with water, and then after a period of time it sets up hard, not like concrete, but pretty hard. This stuff, it comes pre-mixed, and you just dip it out of there and slap it on. It's got a few good points and a few bad points. One is it's ready to go. You don't have to mix it. You don't have to, worry about having too much water, not enough water, getting it mixed properly. It's ready to go. Now, its shelf life, once you open that bucket, if you don't use it in a reasonable period of time, it's going to start to mold. And that's probably got some mold in it. I'll have to scrape off the top and somehow separate the mold from the good stuff, and hopefully I'll be able to use it. But the reason I'm bringing that up now is because I am trying to get rid of this lip, and that's kind of hard to see in this shot, but there's like over 1/8 of an inch of material there, and I don't want to have that lump. I'd like to smooth that out so it can run right into this new drywall. And if that was the setting type, it would be impossible to move that off of there without just grinding it down or whatever. But I believe it is the pre-mixed type, non-setting, and you can re-wet that stuff until it's infinitely old, and then it will just come off basically, and that will produce a lot less dust, because one of the worst things about drywall is it's dusty work. So I scored it around with an angle grinder to kind of get through the paint so I can get some water to that mud. Once I can get the water to the mud, I'm going to take a sponge and just, lightly get some water on it. And it takes a while to get it to soak up some water. So, this is still not a fast way to get it off of there, but in my opinion it's a better way that keeps you from having to deal with so much dust in the room. And once it starts to come off of there, it should, come off pretty good with a putty knife or whatever to, get that junk off the wall, so I can start again sealing up that crack. And that crack is pretty horrific crack. We'll probably, once I get this off, we'll have a little segment on how I'm going to cover that up so that you don't see it in the end. But for now, I'm just going to be working on getting that down a little bit so it's more level. And you can use any kind of scraping device. A regular putty knife is probably best. A full width drywall knife will do the job, but you may want to dig in more than that. And you can see that that stuff comes out pretty good. And the good thing about doing it this way is that it just falls down on the ground and kind of lays in a pile, so I can sweep it up by hand, not with the vacuum machine, because when you get this stuff you want to keep it from turning into dust and being everywhere in the air. So that's what we're going to do for a while, just a little patience and get that down some. Alright, I'm going to start off with some setting mud to get kind of a hard base underneath, and then I may top it off with some of the non-setting type. And this is basically, I don't really want that much, but this is basically the process of mixing it up. You just put it in the mud trough box, whatever you, and then wet it up. And then I want to also show you the two different kinds of tape. So this is the paper tape, and it is really good for the corner. So when I do the corner, I'll use that in the corner because that gives us a little more solid base. But when you use that, you got to get mud on both sides of it because it doesn't have any stick to it. The other kind is this fiber mesh, and that's what I'm going to start with up in these sections up here where I want to get mud to push through the mesh, and then it kind of gives it some structure. But this has a little bit of stickiness to the back of it, so you can put it on and it kind of sticks up there. And then I just usually cut it off with a putty knife, or you can use the trowel, but it kind of can come off with that. That is, you get mud on the tape. So if you do it with a clean knife, it's better. Let me cut some of these pieces up and I'll show you what it looks like. Alright, you can see that tape. I stuck it up in there, and that mud is going to kind of push through that little mesh, and then I'll help hold it there. And then I got to run a piece down this way to cover that gap and get some mud in there too. Okay, so I got that up, and I don't know if you can see it. Right there is a little piece of tape that I put in to help make that transition, and this is the paper tape. The other characteristic is it's a lot thicker. It takes up more space than the mesh tape, because that is, you know, just as thick as that little mesh stuff. And you see this crack right here. I'll use that mesh tape to cover that crack so it doesn't crack back open again like it did last time I fixed it. But I'll get that kind of dug out a little bit, get a piece of mesh tape over that, and that'll be good. But now it's a matter of waiting, you know, 45 minutes, an hour, whatever, for that to dry so that I can put the next coat on. And that's the thing about drywall, no matter which kind of mud you're using, you can't put thick layers on it. You have to put a thin layer on, wait for it to dry, and then put another layer on. Alright, because I want to make the coating, or the amount of mud I put on here, the smallest possible, I want to knock down any high spots in that mud job before I get the next layer on. And one of the tools you can use to do that is just a regular block of wood and some sandpaper. Now this sandpaper kind of looks like a screen. That is designed for sanding drywall. That is just a piece of wet dry sandpaper. You can sand anything like that, but what really makes this have an advantage is that drywall comes off pretty easy, and it doesn't clog up the pores of this. Now this is a pretty old piece of paper, but I just was doing that as a demonstration. This is a new piece. It's quite a bit more expensive than regular sandpaper, but it has some advantages. And also, one of these sanding apparatuses allows that head to move around in any direction as you do the sanding. It creates a good contact patch, and you can sand in any direction at any angle. And it's designed to use these pieces of drywall sanding paper. I got a little hook there, you just unhook it and put a new piece on. But the next coat I'm going to put on, I'm going to use the never dries out kind of mud. So this has got a nice hard foundation, but the next part I'm going to put on is that sort of wimpier stuff, and then I can do some sanding or smoothing with just a sponge. And the same thing I used to kind of knock it down to begin with, I can use this sponge to level it off as well. And I do have one more piece of tape up there to kind of cover over that, and I scratched out that crack a little bit to widen it out so I get mud in there. I'm going to do that, and then up around there, and potentially this corner bead. I'm going to use some paper tape on that, but I have to put of course mud on both sides of the tape when I put it up there. But let's get to that part then. Alright, now I'm going to put that corner piece on, and there's two ways to do this. One method I can use and just put it on the back side of that tape, and that's really hard to do with one hand. But I can do that and kind of get that tape all gooped up. The other method is to put it in the corner and then stick the tape into that fresh mud. I'm not sure exactly which way I'm going to do this. We'll do it one way or another, or both, but let's get her done. Alright, one other tool that can be helpful doing this kind of job is this little corner trowel that can kind of jam the mortar into that corner so that we can get it to go up pretty easy. And then once you got it inside, you just poke it into that corner, and sometimes you have to adjust it to get it so that that corner fold is actually in the corner of the wall. And once you have that in place, then you can go back over it with the corner trowel and get it to stick down. Now it's just a matter of working it into place from there. Alright, I just put another coat on, but one of the things I had to do was kind of smooth out some of the high spots. And there's two ways to do that. One way gives you a nice little pile of dust, and that's sanding. The other way gives you a bunch of mucky, muddy water if you use the kind that doesn't set. You can't use a sponge on the kind that sets up because it won't do anything. But with this sponge, I can rub down some of the high spots to kind of get the next coat as thin as possible. So at this point, it's a lot of kind of playing around. You build it up and sand off the high spots and build it up, because this stuff shrinks, and I can see some spots where it's still kind of low. As it shrinks, it'll create these little valleys in there that you want to fill up. Plus, your coat may not be perfect. I don't know if you can see that. There's a little valley right through there that I'll have to go through and fill up on the next go around. But that's kind of one of the tricks to being successful at drywall, is going through this sanding process and refilling process over and over again until you get a sufficiently smooth surface. And I say sufficiently smooth because it could be okay, or you could, you know, play around with it for the rest of your life and live with sawdust or plaster dust forever. But you kind of have to find that good medium. And if you paint it and it still looks awful, well, you can put more drywall compound on top, but then you have to paint over that and so on. It can be kind of an iterative process. So you have to, if you're good at it, it only takes a few coats to get things in a reasonable state. And I've done the inside of the door too, but it's really dark in there, you can't really see. I probably won't be as picky on the inside of the closet because nobody will actually ever see it. The other thing you need to watch out for is if you have some screws that are not tight enough, they can hang up a little bit. There's one, you can see just a little black spot there. And if they are too high, you can actually take a hammer and tap them down to allow you to cover it over a little easier. That's usually, rather than trying to dig the mud out of it and everything, just whack it down with a hammer, and that will allow you to get it in there so that it's completely covered by the mud. And I think that's going to be it for the drywall thing. I think this is plenty long enough video, and stay tuned for painting if you want to or whatever, but that process is just going to continue with the sponge and the sandpaper to get that into shape that I want it to be in. But there's a lot of patience in this game too. If you're just doing drywall and you just have a small spot like this, you need something else to do or someplace to go or something while it dries out, because once you put it up there, it's got to dry before you can move on to the next stage or the next state of it. Like and subscribe, that kind of stuff. Thanks. Bye.